Hey there, welcome to Board Game Hot Takes, the podcast where we give our immediate reactions to the hottest board games just minutes after playing them. My name's Tim.
And this is Chris.
This is Adam.
And tonight, instead of giving our hot take review of a game we just finished playing, we're going to continue our countdown of the top 30 games of all time. Tonight, we're going to be looking at numbers 11 through 20. Last week, we went through number 21 through 30, so if you missed that, go back and listen to it. And next week, we'll be doing number 1 through 10, so follow along if you're interested and excited. Before we jump into this conversation, though, I do have a couple things to cover. Number one, we are going to be in 2 episodes. We're going to be doing our episode 100, which is our listener appreciation episode. And we're going to be looking at our listeners' top 10 games of all times. The way we're going to do that is I put out a Google poll that lets our listeners put in their top 3 games of all time. And we're going to be compiling all that data, looking at the ones that got the most hits on it, and then counting up the top 10. And then we're also going to be comparing that against our top 10s to see which one of us is most aligned with our listeners. Obviously, it's going to be me, but I can't wait to see how those results come in and see what our listeners say are the top 10 games of all time.
There's 2 particular things that I'm really curious to hear out of that poll. One, what the most common game is. That's an obvious one. But I'm also curious to see if there are any completely off the wall, never heard of them, what the heck is that games that pop up in the poll.
I'm most curious to see how wrong Tim is about all the statements that he just made. If this is the rank choice voting system, we just had elections here across the nation, and interested to see if we got the rank choice, the most fair voting system, and then we'll see that anything Tim has to say is completely ignored.
Well, the good news is that since I'm the one that does all the work on these things, I'll be the one compiling the results, and I can just kind of make it come out however I want to. But that's not going to happen. I will tally the results accurately. I will get Adam and Chris, poll ninjas, in there to come and review the results and make sure everything looks good. We've already posted this on Twitter and Facebook. You can find us on Twitter at BG_hot takes and on Facebook at Board Game Hot Takes. But you can also, if you don't follow the social media platforms, just go to boardgamehottakes.com/listeners and you can find the poll there. All you have to do is add your email address, your top 3 games of all time, and your first name. And we're going to be drawing from everybody who enters a result here. We're going to be drawing and giving a $100 GameNerds.com gift certificate to a winner of that poll. So a little motivation to get out there and do it, aside from just having some input into our listeners' top 10 games of all time. So that's number 1. Number 2 is that if you're new to the show, every week we post a poll on Twitter and we ask a question about board games, board game industry, board game news, something. We ask some kind of poll and we get our listeners' responses to it. So this week is no different. It may be special because we're doing our top 30 games of all time, but you still have to listen to our poll results. So the poll that I asked on Twitter this week is, if a board game reviewer is given games by a publisher to review, which would be called review copies, does it make you trust the reviewer's opinion more or less? And I gave just 3 options on this one: more, no change, or less. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. Adam and Chris, how do you feel about this, and where do you think our listeners fell on this result?
I think that it depends on the reviewer, because some reviewers, I know they get review copies all the time because they're bigger podcasts, and just if a board game gets a mention on one of their podcasts, they'll probably get other people interested regardless of the follow-on review of that game itself. So I know certain reviewers, I just trust them. No matter what kind of game they get, they're going to list their caveats. Hey, this was a review copy. Hey, I know the designer here, but here's what I think about the game. And so those are the podcasts I tend to listen to and the reviewers I trust. So I don't think it matters if they get a review copy. There's obviously going to be some bias if they get a free copy of a game that's built in. And I don't know, I'm going to understand that listening to them. And I would hope that the reviewers are able to mitigate and submit a trustworthy review.
Based on what I saw in the poll results so far, I'm thinking that people are primarily going to think basically what Adam said, that it's not going to change their opinion a whole lot because you trust your reviewers. And I agree with that. If there's a reviewer that you trust, I'm not sure that knowing there was a review copy that came with that review is going to make me trust them less. But I will also say I think that's a slippery slope. I mean, it's basic human psychology that if somebody gives you something free, you're going to feel a certain level of connection to them, a certain level of warmth. I mean, it's the whole idea behind salesmanship, right? You know, you go and you build a relationship with somebody, and then you're more inclined to want to react to, positively to what it is that they're presenting to you, or buy something from them, or, whatever the thing happens to be. So, I mean, personally, for me, that's one of the reasons why I have really not been that interested in getting review copies of games. I think I've reviewed one game that had a review copy, and that was an expansion to a game that I had already bought and really liked. So, I not pointing fingers at anybody who does take review copies. I think that can be perfectly legit. Just it doesn't make me terribly comfortable doing that.
Yeah, so here's how people answered. So 3% said having review copies makes you trust them more. And there was one response that spoke a little bit to that. 79% said no change. So the vast majority of people don't think that a reviewer or a board game critic is going to be impacted by receiving a review copy. And 18% said they trusted them less. And I think there's, a good reason for that. The reason I was thinking about this is that I have asked for a couple review copies for some publishers, not very many, and we've received a couple unsolicited. Most of them I've declined because I didn't think they were games that we were very excited or interested in playing, but a couple that I have accepted from publishers. Yeah, like I said, most of them, if you read all the comments on this poll, and by the way, go out to BG_hot takes, take a look at this poll that I asked. This was on June 13th, and there's a whole bunch of interesting responses here. And just like the poll results showed, the vast majority of people said, no, we don't think it will impact them. And in fact, there were some really optimistic views of saying like, well, publishers aren't giving board game critics or reviewers games, you're going to get a lot less reviewed, because if you're going to make them have to buy them themselves, then they won't get those. But let's be honest, the vast majority of us, and I would say us included, this is a hobby for us, right? We love board games. We love talking about it. We're not doing this for a living. And whether or not we get review copies, we're going to keep talking about games, whether we get them or not. And we're rejecting review copies that we don't want to play anyway. And for the most case, if we really want to play something, we'll probably buy it. A lot of interesting results here, and a couple specifically that I wanted to call out. And then I want to talk a little bit my own experience here. Brian Chandler, who is a reviewer, he tends to focus on accessibility in games. He's colorblind, and so he focuses a lot on how easy it is to get into a game, how colorblind friendly it is, and things like that. But he said, as a reviewer, I find it hard to objectively critique games I receive from the publisher. I try my best, but in my opinion, it's impossible not to be affected a little. To mitigate, I ensure I declare receiving review copies and/or other industry relationships. I think there's a lot of truth to this, right? And regardless, we've only done this a handful of times, asked for review copies or received them. But I have to admit that even though I've been a little bit critical of some of the review copies we've received, I've raised some concerns I have about them. But at the same point, it makes me want to put more energy into trying to find the good of them. I think every single time, if I opened a game, played it the first time, didn't have a great experience, I go back and try to find where it's fun. And sometimes that comes, right, with multiple plays. Sometimes that happens. So I think I'm kind of aligned with Brian on this, is that it is hard, if you receive a review copy, to not at least think a little bit about positive about it and want to put your best foot forward, right?
I'm glad you mentioned Brian Chandler, because I find it just always interesting to hear his view of board games, because it's what he's seeing, and from getting that perspective from a colorblind person on how games work for him, always interesting to hear what he puts out there. And I like what he said here about review copies as well.
Yeah. And, I think it's just an honest approach. Now, there are some reviewers, there's some board game critics that publishers are going to send games to no matter what, because they have such big numbers that they're going to get exposure regardless. So Shut Up and Sit Down, no pun included, The Secret Cabal, The Dice Tower, of course. Everybody wants The Dice Tower's 30,000 viewers to look at that game regardless of whether they get good reviews or not. So those guys are always going to keep getting games. But here's my very, very early opinion, having just reviewed a couple of games. Every single one of the times when I had a little bit negative to say about the game, a little bit of concerns about it, or issues that I raised with it, I wasn't glowing about it, we really basically didn't get any contact back from that reviewer again, or stopped getting retweets, stuff like that. And so if you think that negative reviews don't impact the relationship between the reviewer and the publisher, I don't think that's accurate at all. I think it is going to have a major impact. And in fact, again, I went back, if you went a couple of weeks ago, the Board Game Barrage podcast posted a thing about negative reviews. And they talk a little bit about some specific cases where reviewers called them out, called them names, said they would never send them things again. So a minor experience that I've got, but I think it kind of matches up. So I think it's kind of an interesting position. Yes, publishers should be using board game reviewers to get exposure. But I don't think these small publishers really are necessarily thinking that negative exposure is good enough to justify the negative reviews. I think there's a lot of sensitivity there and stuff like that. So I don't think it's as cut and dry as even most of our listeners think, that it doesn't have any impact. Our perspective, this is my own stance, is that going forward here, we're not going to be requesting any review copies because of this exact issue. Like, there are some games that I would like to try, but I don't want to pay for to put into my own collection, but I'd love to try and talk about it. But I don't want the pressure of feeling like I have to put the energy into a review. I don't want to have to feel bad about talking negatively about a game I don't love. So we're not going to be requesting review copies at this point. There may be unique situations if we get offered a review copy and it just seems like a game that might be really interesting to us, we might still take a look at it. But I'm just going to say right now that publishers, if you offer it to us, we don't really have any interest in advertising your game. We're just here to talk about the games that we like playing. So that could happen, but it's not going to be something that's going to happen very often.
Now, my favorite games, all-time favorite games, are the ones that are review copies that come with like $2,000 cash. Have you guys ever got those?
Not so far.
In all seriousness, I like that stance, and I like that we can just kind of be independent people talking about games that we want to talk about. I think that's the funnest way to do it for me, and I like that stance.
Yep, agreed.
There was one review. I told you there was a few people that said that it raised their trust level if the reviewer was getting review copies. And so I want to read just this one review really quickly, because I think there may be some truth to this as well, but I think it's going to be rare and far between. The one person that commented, it's @RidiculousRain on Twitter, and he said, "I was thinking no change, but it still makes me trust it less than when a reviewer needs to acquire a copy with their own money. 1, it forces them to consider whether they spent the money well, and 2, no incentive of giving a good review to secure future review copies." I'm not sure I understand what number 2 means, but number 1, I think what they're trying to say here is that, somebody who buys a game with their own money, they're automatically kind of incentivized to want to feel good about it because it makes them feel good about their own. I think this is a big part of why, if you look at the Board Game Geek ratings, generally very popular big Kickstarter games, there's going to be a lot of people that rate it a 10 because they spent this money, they had all this anticipation that came in, and they just want to, they want to feel good about what they just received. So I think there's potentially some truth to that. And if you're talking about independent reviewers and critics that are having to buy games, they're probably going to be a little more incented to only talk about games that they like and probably want to feel good about their purchases. Me personally, I'd rather just dump games that I don't like, so I'm happy to talk bad about them.
Exactly, Tim. I think that might have been true at one point for me. I bought this game. I want to really, really love it. But then once you realize you can go sell these things on the secondary market and get almost back what you paid for them, it kind of gives you a different perspective. Like, hey, I'm going to kind of try this thing short term. If it doesn't work for me, it'll work for somebody else. And that's kind of the nature of, everybody's got different tastes, and pass this along to somebody else if you're not enjoying it. And you don't have to worry about having to feel good about something you paid $130 for that you'll never play again.
Yeah, and that instinct that you guys are talking about is absolutely real. I mean, I've had several games that I got, particularly Kickstarters, where I played a game of it after waiting for 2 years, whatever, play a game and go, man, this is a lot of fun. And then 2 or 3 weeks later, after a couple more games, I'm like, this really sucks. This really isn't that much fun.
Yeah. All right, well, cool. Again, if you don't follow us on Twitter, BG_hot takes, there was a ton of interesting responses out there. Go check them out. And every week, if you want to be part of this poll response and just, leave in some comments, we may read your comments on the show. Follow us on Twitter and interact. We also just love to chat with our listeners, hang out, have conversations about board games. That's what we're all here for. So come join us out there. All right, let's jump into the exciting part of the night. That is our number 11 through 20 best board games of all time. This is the definitive best number 11 through 20 games of all time, according to us at this point. If you're interested in how we came to these results, go back and listen to last week's episode. We talk a little bit about how we came up with the results and some of the restrictions we gave ourselves for coming up with this list. But tonight, we're just going to jump right into the list. Tonight, we're going to start out with Adam.
My number 20 game of all time ever is Beyond the Sun. That's by Dennis K. Chan, published by Rio Grande Games. And I really enjoyed this game. We initially played it on Tabletop Simulator with a pretty good mod there, and then it's over on Board Game Arena now. You can play it all day long, super quick. And this game revolves around a giant tech tree. There's 4 levels of technology. You usually have to research a couple level 1s before you can research a level 2, and so on for level 3. And if you get to level 4, that could have some massive point scoring abilities depending on what you've done the rest of the game. Also, there's a sideboard of planets to colonize with some area control. Not too ruthless area control. You kind of get your ships in position, then you're able to colonize that, take that card over to your hand, and it'll add to your little point scoring engine at the end of the game. This game's quick. It has these dice. It has a nice spreadsheet player board thing that you're trying to manage your dice, which can be either people or ships, and that's basically it. And then you've got one other resource, which is this iron or ore. I forget what it's called. So it's light on resources. It uses these dice in clever ways. I like how it has these, the worlds can be either little plant worlds or little cog worlds, the little circle wooden pieces. That's a clever mechanism too. I enjoy this game so much. It's my number 20 of all time. That is Beyond the Sun.
I feel like this is a game I would like a lot more if I actually learned the rules. I mean, I played this thing about a dozen times and still have no idea what the heck I'm doing. And I feel like this is one of those ones, like last week we mentioned Through the Ages, A New Story of Civilization, and Tim made fun of the little blue boxes. And this is kind of like the little blue boxes, those weird, the people and the rocks and the cogs, and like, I don't even know what the hell's going on there. But I mean, I feel like there's a really good game in there. I just have been way too lazy to actually learn it.
I think this is a great example of a game, Chris, where the rule set is actually pretty straightforward. And once you understand it, it's easy to play. And it's just hard to explain until you can get like sitting down in front of the game and pick up those little dice and flip them around and kind of show how things work. So I think this would probably be easy to teach in person, a little harder to pick up online. Great game. Last year, this was my number 10 game of all time. We'll see if it stands on my list this year. But it's a really fun game. I think this game would really benefit from an expansion. I think there is an expansion that's supposed to be coming out either later this year, maybe next year. I know they're going to be including a solo mode in it, which could be really fun. I think this game would be potentially great with the solo mode. But also, I think the game really needs some more diversity in the technology cards that you can discover. Like, it's fun. It's always a fun thing. But a lot of the technology cards feel like just slightly improved or slightly different from other cards there. So I'd love to see some drastically different effects come into it. And if it did, that would really spice it up and make it really exciting. But this game is really fun. Look past the weak prototype-like production, and the game is pretty enjoyable.
I forget what it was one of you guys said in our review of it way back in like 2020, but I think it was something like, this game looks like a big spreadsheet, which it does. So before I get into my number 20 game, I just wanted to say that I think that this was my most fun grouping of games, because the 20 to 30 was, stuff that really didn't make it high enough. I mean, it's not my favorite stuff. It's not the most interesting stuff to me, so it's not as interesting to talk about. They're good games, but they're not amazing games. And then 1 through 10, it's like, duh, those are the no-brainers. Those are the ones I talk about all the time. And so there wasn't as much excitement in there. But I think this middle section is really the sweet spot. It's the games that are kind of up and coming. They're getting ready to come into my top 10 maybe, but they're not quite there yet. Probably haven't talked about them quite as much. And so I'm really excited tonight to get into those. So my number 20 game of all time is Obsession, designed by Dan Halligan and published by Kayenta Games. This is a game that I teased Tim mercilessly about making us play back when we did our review on this a year or so ago. And I had a rocky relationship with it since then, because we had a great game that night and I was absolutely blown away by it. Then I bought a copy and I played a couple games and I started going, I'm not so sure about this game. It started to feel a little bit the same. But then I started getting better with the strategy and understanding kind of the mechanic a little bit better. And I played a couple more games, and now I'm just absolutely in love with this game again. For those who haven't heard of it or played it before, Obsession is set in Victorian England, where you are head of a once upon a time great family, now a bit of has-beens, along with all your other has-been friends that are playing with you. And a new fancy family has moved into town, and they have fancy rich kids. And you want to marry one of your kids to their fancy rich kids. I mean, that's what you did in Victorian England, right? And so every game of this feels like an episode of Downton Abbey. You try to attract those eligible bachelors and bachelorettes by throwing the best parties, building up the fanciest manor. And for all of this, you're providing the appropriate service. That's the cool mechanism of the game, that each building tile that you can put in your manor has an activity. And if you have an activity, then you get to play these cards out of your hand that are friends and family members. But if you want to get the best people to your parties, you have to be able to provide service to them. And that means if you want to have a gentleman of high standing that attends your lawn bowling party, you better have a valet for him. So that kind of thing is going on. And honestly, even though this game sounds so dry, when you get into it, there is such a story there. It's like there's almost as much story in a game of Obsession as there is in a game of Nemesis. It's a very different story, but there's a ton of story in there. And honestly, when I'm playing this game, I just like to sit there and read the cards, because you're hearing the little backstories on these guests that you're bringing to your parties is just so much fun. And I have fallen in love with this game, fell out of love with it a little bit, but then fallen back in love with it in a big way. And it's one of those games now that I try to get out as often as I can because I just love playing it.
And there you have it, folks. The first ever direct comparison between Nemesis and Obsession. Now, Chris, this game is really interesting, and I did enjoy our play of it, but I did remember having some quibbles with it, some things that turned me off on it a little bit. Now, a lot of people who listen to that review have reached out to us on social media and said, you got to try the upstairs downstairs expansion. It fixes all the things that you guys had concerns with. Have you had a chance to play that expansion, Chris?
I have not. I'd like to get that, though.
That's cool that you even, just by playing through it a little bit more and getting a hang on the strategy, that you're still liking it a lot. But I think, if you like it that much, I'd say check it out, because I've heard it makes it improves some of the things, some of the randomness, some of the the tricky parts of it that we didn't love about it on our first play. So very cool to hear about that again. I'd love to play it again. It's been a while for me. So I'd like to give it a try.
Yeah, I'd give this one a try again too, Chris. That cycle you mentioned of initially having a high impression of a game and then be like, well, I don't know. Now it's kind of fallen flat for me. And then maybe it re-blossoms. You discover some more things about it and it elevates back up again. I've had that with a few different games. I think that's interesting that you mentioned that.
Yeah. Now, Chris, you mentioned as you were starting to talk about your games that this was an interesting mix for you. This is an interesting mix. This week's list of number 11 through 20 is interesting for me as well, because there was a number of games here that could have made my top 10 easily, and then a number of games here that I'm kind of surprised weren't in my 20s. So it is definitely like somewhere in the middle there. It splits from being the top tier to the great games, but not my top tier, right? And so there's a mix in here. But my number 20, the first one I'm going to talk about, is a classic. It is Magic the Gathering. This was designed by Richard Garfield, originally published in 1993, published by Wizards of the Coast. Magic the Gathering is really hard to talk about in a list of board games because, board games generally you open the box, you've got a rule set, you've got a defined rule set, and you've got a box of components, and that's the game. But Magic the Gathering can be played so many ways, and I think there's a lot of people that don't understand this about it. You might have a picture to say like, hey, if I want to play in Magic, I have to go and spend $1,000 on the latest hot deck that, deck list that's put together online, and to play it, that's the only way to have fun with it. But that's not true. That's the worst way to play Magic the Gathering. In fact, the best way to play is to get a couple starter packs, learn how to play the game, and then start mixing your cards together with your friends who also just have a few cards together and starting to find those creative links and building some decks. And then the even better way to play it, once you know how to play the game, is to start doing some limited games where you're drafting the cards and putting together your deck on the fly, and then playing some games with those random cards that came together and finding the best, the best options out of that little limited mix that you've got. There's so many fun ways to play this game. Don't play the competitive tournament Magic constructed way. That's a terrible way to play Magic. Play Magic to have fun with it, have a small pool of cards, and make the best out of it. And it's a blast. I will play this game anytime. The only reason it's not higher on my list, I think, is because it helps if the people you're playing with have some experience with, know the game. It's just not a game. I'm not in the Magic tournament scene around here. I'm not finding local Magic. I'd rather play a variety of board games, and so we're not getting that much into it. But I still have a Magic cube in my house. I will never get rid of it. It's enough cards for 8 people to sit down and draft, and if I know 7 other people that want to sit down and play Magic with me, that will be the best night of my last 10 years. So I still love Magic the Gathering, and I've been playing it for 25 years or something like that.
Tim, this one is a little intimidating for me. There's almost kind of a stigma with, oh, you're a Magic the Gathering player. Oh gosh, what is that going to mean? I feel like if I play this one with you, I just get my butt kicked. I get slaughtered. So there's a couple things that are, kind of keeping me away from it. But you know what? I'd love to try. Is that true? If I did play this one with you, I assume you'd slaughter me the first 20, 30, 40, 50 forever. or would I ever be able to catch up? What's it going to take for me to get close to competitive with you?
Yeah, there's a skill curve here, and that's kind of what makes it hard, right? If you're playing with somebody that's a lot more experienced than you, they're going to have the tempo down. They're going to understand how to value the cards better and things like that. So I think that's one of the hard parts of me trying to introduce new people to this game, and why I probably won't try that hard. On the other hand, there's still a fair bit of randomness in what comes off your deck, right? You're drawing off a random deck of cards that you've built together. So even the newest players can get a little bit of good luck, and the best players can get a little bit of bad luck. And so you still have an opportunity to win a game. So I think it can still be fun even for newer players. You know, when you're talking about these head-to-head duels, of course the most experienced player is going to have a lot of opportunity to win. But you can also play this like 3 or 4 player, and then, you know, just like you guys normally do, you can just pick on me. If everyone beats up on me, you got a good shot of staying in the game and battling out amongst each other. There is player elimination in this game, so if you're playing multiplayer, somebody can get knocked out, but the games take 20, 30 minutes max to play, so it's not a big deal to do that. So I think it'd still be fun to teach you guys, sit down and draft, but, you know, I don't know if it's worth the investment for you versus sitting down and playing a new board game, because I think it's going to take a while to really get the most enjoyment out of it. You know, you gotta play for a bit, get to know the rules before you can really start to have fun doing that. So I don't know how to answer that, Adam, other than you're probably right. It's probably not going to be a great first experience.
Hey, is it a little bit weird that we're talking about a game that Tim used to be nationally ranked on and you and I have never actually played, and he's complaining about us picking on him?
I would say that's weird, but that's just classic Tim at this point.
Yeah, this is true. This is true.
My number 19 game of all time ever is Star Wars Rebellion, a game that Tim absolutely loves. Not really. This game is designed by Corey Konieczka and published by Fantasy Flight Games. I have had so much fun playing this game. You got the Death Star. You got all the main characters from the original Star Wars trilogy. You can be the good guys. You can be the Rebellion, or you can be the Empire. My dad, he always is the Empire, trying to crush me. That's just like growing up, right? And as a Rebellion, you got this hidden base. The Empire's trying to find it. Are they going to be able to find it? Nope, you're just playing cat and mouse. Oh, they think it's over here? Nope, they have no clue where it is. They're never going to find my base. Haha, Dad, I finally beat you. Get out of my face. We played this last time, Tim. It was getting out of control. I was getting really ahead, and you decided to concede. And I was like, wait a minute, what the heck? That's a great idea. Tim has no chance here. I'm glad you called it early. There's no reason to spend another 3 hours playing this game when you had no chance of survival. I don't know, just that point about games. We were talking about Air, Land, and Sea last time, where that's part of the mechanic. You can concede, and it's part of the game. You can, mitigate points lost if you concede early. So anyway, Star Wars Rebellion can go long. Combat is kind of wonky. Expansion fixes some things, but it still goes long. I still love this game. If you've got an afternoon, if you've got a day to play this game and you love Star Wars, give it a shot. Star Wars Rebellion, that is my number 19 game of all time.
I'm with you, Adam, that is a super fun game. One thing that I just think is so clever and fun about it, that the whole game is the Empire trying to find the Rebel base. And you can build up your Rebel base, but your Rebel base is this little spot off to the side, so the Empire can see what you're putting in there, like kind of what they're going up against, and you can keep building that up, but they just don't know where it is. I don't know. I thought that was cool.
First I have to say that I think we need to ask a poll question about conceding games, and I think there's a lot of conversation to be had there. But I have to call out that the time that I conceded this game to Adam, and he said it's good that Tim conceded early, this was like 2.5 hours into this game, by the way. And there's probably another 2 hours to go with me having no chance of winning. But also, to be fair, this was the first time I'd played with the expansion, and I misread one of the cards, a critical card for the Rebels, where you can sabotage the Empire's bases and stuff like that. And I didn't realize until about that point that text was actually on there. So I really couldn't hamper Adam's movement. By that point, it was too late in the game. So this is a really fun game, super thematic. I don't hate it. I know Adam calls me out for hating it all the time. It's just, it goes a little long for me for the type of game it is, but it's cool. It's a very fun game.
So there's actually a little bit of similarity with my number 19 game of all time, which is Batman Gotham City Chronicles, designed by, I am going to pronounce this wrong, but it's Frederick Henry. He has 2 accent marks in his name, and I have no idea how that gets pronounced, but I believe it's French, so I think it's probably Henri. Published by Monolith Games. This is fanboy service on an epic scale. Just putting this game on a table It's like laying out the battle map. The boards for this game, which it comes with a couple of them, are huge, and they all represent some iconic scene from Batman, Arkham Asylum, or the streets of Gotham City, or Wayne Manor, or what have you. And there must be something like 75 playable characters that are available through all the various expansions that you can get on Kickstarter. Essentially every character that has ever existed in the Batman universe and every villain that's ever existed. And then you get them all out on the board and you pick a mission out of a book that comes along with the game. And essentially it gives you the setup guide for the mission that you want to go on. So there's going to be a goal, there's going to be things you have to accomplish as the heroes or the villain. And then it tells you this is the suite of characters that you have available. Like you can pick, there's like 3 characters that'll be played. Here's 5 characters, here's 5 more, and here's 5 more. Pick one from each group. It's almost like, a menu at a restaurant. And then you get out there, and then the same thing happens with the villains, and you go for it. You try to accomplish your mission. Lots of tactical action here, and probably the densest rule set I have ever seen in a board game, which is one of the reasons why I compare it to Star Wars Rebellion. That you really have to dig into this one. There's a lot of edge cases. There's a lot of things happening. And this is one of the few games where I think the rule set is so daunting and so much of a beatdown, yet I love it. Because all of those little nitpicky rules serve the story and the Batman characters and put you in that world of Gotham City. And here's an example of what I mean. There's all these various items that you can find around the maps. You can find weapons and things like that. And some of them are firearms. And there is an icon that you find on some of the cards. And I think it's called Moral Code. And those characters will not use a firearm. So Batman won't use a firearm. He won't use a gun. Robin won't use a gun. Other characters will use guns. And so it's one of these things where you have to really be paying attention and have to be really careful, or else you're going to be inadvertently cheating, or purposely cheating, I guess. But just having that little bit of storytelling built into the rule set is amazing to me, because I know the characters, I know how they act, and that to me feels real. And there's a million of those little things. So this is a game that I think could be a lot higher on my list if I actually get to play it more often. I've played it, I think, 3 times with Tim. He trounced me every time. I was the heroes and he was the villains. And I just so want to get this game on the table, but it's so hard to find the opportune time to do that because it is such an epic game. Now, thank goodness, Monolith is putting out now on Kickstarter. In fact, I think I don't think it's active anymore. I think it just ended a season 3 of Batman Gotham City Chronicles that has a solo mode. And that is a dream come true for me, because once that's out, I'll be able to play this game as often as I want to, even if I can't convince anybody else to sacrifice an entire day to a game of Batman Gotham City Chronicles with me. And so maybe next time it'll be higher, but right now it's number 19 on my list.
Gotham City Chronicles is a super fun system, and as Chris already mentioned, the rule book is dense, it's poorly written, and the one of the bigger problems is not only just that there's some edge case rules, but like every single villain you play with, every single character has unique iconography on it that isn't very sensible, and in many cases it's not even that different from other characters. So it's a shame that they made it so obtuse when it didn't need to be. That said, I had a really fun time once we actually figured out how to play the game, playing the game. The scenarios were pretty interesting, very thematic, and the villains, which is what I played every time we played it, is such a cool system where you've got this row of villain tiles that kind of represent the characters you can take actions with. And as they move to the left of this board, they're cheaper to take actions with. I forget exactly how it works, but basically I think they're more powerful or they're cheaper or something like that. I think it's cheaper. And then, but if you want to jump in and take one from a villain that's further to the right, then they cost you more energy points or action points or something like that. So really cool system, really fun. One thing I wish we'd always done, and I know Chris has this, is that there is a kind of a competitive mode where you can play against each other in a non-scenario way where you both have that card row and both players are playing with the characters in that way. And I think that could be really fun to try that and see how it works, getting out of the specific scenarios. I did feel like the scenarios felt like they were leaning to making it harder for the heroes, but that's probably because we were playing a 2-player game where it's kind of made to be one versus many, and the heroes are supposed to be run by multiple people. So I think maybe that Chris was trying to manage these 3 heroes and, all of the different actions that they maintain, versus I only had to manage my one system over on the other side of the board. In any case, fun system. I had fun playing with it. Maybe if the rulebook becomes easier, I'd want to dig back into it. But I seriously feel like I could spend 2 hours trying to re-understand the rules just to sit down and play another scenario of this. And I don't think it's worth it for me, but I'd do it for Chris if the opportunity arose.
I want to try this one. You guys both talk about the rulebook, and the dense rulebook is one way to put it. Paul Grogan, who is a specialist in the board game world at writing rulebooks. He also has a lot of how to play videos. He was part of this season 3 campaign. He has written revised rulebooks and made player aids to go along with the game. I'd be very interested in taking a look at those. I'd love to try this game, Chris. Now, a question for you. What are some of the most obscure, fun characters to play? Have you gone that deep? Can you name some off the top of your head?
Oh, man. Wow. Okay. So here's one of my very short-lived villain in the Batman world, but I thought super interesting and cool. Mr. Bloom. He's this weird, skinny guy with really long... You ever see Slender Man?
I've heard of that, yeah.
You know Slender Man from like the memes? So he looks kind of like Slender Man.
Okay.
And he's really creepy. And so he's in the game. And so that's probably about as obscure as I can think of from it. There's probably more. I'm just forgetting them. There's so many characters I couldn't possibly remember them all. But
yeah, Chris, have you even cracked the cellophane on all the boxes of content that you got for this game?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was kind of cool. Like we played through a few of the first scenarios, and there were some major, villains there. I think like the Penguin was in there and stuff like that. But there was some obscure ones too. They mixed in a nice mix of like even obscure heroes. But then there was a lot of just like goons, right? So there's just like random goons and like Penguin's goons, and so a variety of different characters that you're going to play with every scenario. I don't think we replayed with the same characters in any of the 3 scenarios we played. They were all different villains. They were all different heroes every time we played. And Chris got we were only in the starter box, and Chris got like 8 huge boxes of miniatures and scenarios and characters and stuff like that. So obviously a lot to explore there. I think aside from the rule book, I think they probably attempted to over simulate the scenarios a little bit. Like they didn't leave it open-ended enough. So puzzles you had to do, the maps, the way things were set up, it was just so engineered to be a specific way that I'd almost not want to go back and replay that same scenario because it would almost feel repetitive. And so I think that's a negative too. But, again, we only got through 3 of them. There's enough content in there that you could probably play a lot of these and never have to go back to the same scenario. So, there's a lot to explore there. So it was a cool system. All right, so my number 19 has already been mentioned today, and that's Beyond the Sun by Dennis K. Chan and Rio Grande Games. Don't have too much more to say about it. Adam and I didn't already mention. Great game. One thing I'll mention, though, is I did get a chance to play this, the physical production at one point, because we had mostly played it online on Board Game Arena, on Tabletop Simulator, etc. And the physical production doesn't really change anything. It's nice, like chunky cardboard and stuff like that, so it doesn't feel cheap, but it still looks like a poor production. But one thing I did say to somebody recently that said I never had any interest in playing that because it's so ugly is that I got over the ugliness by like the 3rd play. Yes, I was turned off at first. It was a big negative, and then I stopped caring because the game systems are pretty fun. It's pretty interesting and fun decisions. And the more the more you play it, the more of a competitive puzzle it gets, where you're racing each other for the technology, you're racing each other for the planets, and it's a fun game. I could go back and play this game, I think, anytime. And I think the expansion could potentially raise it depending on exactly what's in there. So excited to continue playing this game. Not something I've added to my collection quite yet, but I probably will at some point. It's good enough to go back to.
Great pick, Tim. My number 18 game, we've been talking a lot about fancy society and trying to be the belle of the ball. I'm going to talk about High Society. This is by Rainer Knizia, and published by Osprey Games. Many publishers, the version I have is by Osprey Games. This is a little card game. There's about, I don't know how many, 12 cards that you're going to bid on. Each person playing has, I want to say, $60-something in different denominations. I think the highest denomination is a 20, then you have like a 15, a 10, and it goes down to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you're bidding around the table for these different cards that have these different effects, and you're kind of keeping track of what's been bid already, which is important because if you spend too much at the end of this, then you can't be the winner. So as you're bidding for these cards, they're all worth different points, right? So you want to have the most points at the end. Whoever has the most points at the end is the winner, unless you are that person that spent the most money. It's a quick card game. Chris is shaking his head at me, even though this game's so great. He doesn't even remember playing it. I guarantee that. What a great game. High Society, quick, fun decisions. What do you have to say about this, Chris?
I remember enough to know I didn't like it. A lot.
I remember having a good time with this game. I lost at it every single time, but it was fun. It's a very fun game. In fact, because when I was ranking my top 30, I looked at all the games that I had ranked a 9 or higher on Board Game Geek, and this one was a 9. So it actually was in my ranking engine when I was going through this list. It didn't end up making my top 30, but very fun game. I'd love to go back to it anytime. It's fun, filler, 10, 15 minutes. Could knock this out before the start of a game night, and it's a good game to go back to.
So my number 18 is a game that I have a feeling we're going to hear more about in this episode or maybe the next episode. Drum roll, please. This one's going to shock you guys. It is Gaia Project, designed by Jans Drogenmuller and Helga Ostertag, and published by Furlan Spiel. This is a game that I really, really disliked for the longest, and I think a part of that, in retrospect, had to do with, one, the goofy-ass artwork, which I still really have a hard time with. And two, the fact that when we played this game on Tabletop Simulator, when we reviewed it back in 2020, it just felt so oppressive and unenjoyable to me. And then BGA comes along. Gaia Project's on BGA. I can't remember if it was... Actually, I think it might have been me that sent Tim an invitation, because I'm like, I need to give this one another chance. I just need to give this game a shot. He's talked so much about it and how much he enjoys it, and I did, and the game has steadily grown on me since. Now, I have no idea how to play this game, or at least, I know the rules. I just can't actually put together a cohesive game. I think I might have won one game out of the 20 or so that I've played, and that was probably by pure luck. But there's just so much interesting stuff going on here. You're traveling around this solar system or star system, whatever it is. You are various races of beings, and each one has their own planetary requirements, and you're Gaia forming things, and you are terraforming planets. I guess technically not terraforming, since you're turning into something other than Earth, and then you can build things on the planets once you've achieved the ability to build on them and get the right atmosphere in there for you. And it's an engine builder where you continue to build up your ability to produce. You build up your buildings, science. There's a science track. So much fun stuff going on. Won't get into a ton of it because I know this is a game we've talked about ad nauseum on this show. Suffice to say that it's a game that has grown on me a ton, and there's a lot to explore here. If I can ever actually figure out how to crack the code on this game, I might actually love it, might make it into top 10. But for now, it's stuck down there at number 18.
Just two things to say about this game. Number one, I don't think you're going to hear about it this week from anyone else. And number two, this has the best 4X artwork that exists.
You're joking, right?
No, not at all. No,
Absolutely false.
I think it's more interesting and more fun than Eclipse, than Twilight Imperium, than Arcs. I love the artwork here, Chris. I know you don't like it. I think it's charming. I think it's fun. Every time I'm sitting there staring at my little civilization board and looking at the goofy little aliens, I like the art style. So I disagree with you on that. But, that's the thing about art, right? It's subjective.
Yeah, this is just so, that's like if somebody says my favorite band is Milli Vanilli. I kind of go, I want to put you on the couch and kind of figure out what's going on in there. So I don't know.
I hate to say that I was a really huge fan of Milli Vanilli when I was in 8th grade. So...
All right.
Nothing wrong with being a fan of Milli Vanilli. I think everybody was a fan. I'm also a fan of Gaia Project. And Chris, I want to mention too, the factions here are great. Each faction has its own little twist that adds some new little hiccup in the strategy you might be trying to go for. The round bonuses at the end of each round might stack up in your favor. You can tie this one into this one into this one. The little bonus marker that you pick. There's so much cool stuff that makes this game super fun. We'll be hearing about this one more for sure in the future.
All right. So my number 18 game was kind of a surprise to me, but I just love this game. I'm charmed by it. It's Lords of Waterdeep. This was published in 2012, again by Wizards of the Coast. I guess I'm on a Wizards of the Coast nostalgia trip tonight. But this was designed by Peter Lee and Rodney Thompson. Now, Peter Lee is one of the lead designers of Prospero Hall, which is well known for taking a lot of IP games and making very solid games with them. And that's what he did with Lords of Waterdeep. Basically took this Dungeons and Dragons theme and put it into a very approachable, but in my opinion, a very fun worker placement Euro style game, resource management game. Now, this is one of many games I want to say that I think it's only on this list because of the expansion. When you play the base game, it's solid, but it's pretty dry. It gets pretty repetitive quickly. But the expansion adds a lot of variety. It adds a little tension. Some of the things that are cool about it is that it's like an order, fulfillment game. The idea that you're just collecting the right, in this case, adventures, but it's resources to turn in to fill orders, or I think they're quests. But one of the cool things about it is that every time you fill a quest, they'll give you something. It may be victory points, it may be other adventures, might be money, but many of them are ongoing quests that give you basically a little piece to your engine. It makes it a little bit stronger. Actions that you do later are better, things like that. So it's got this fun little engine building piece built into it. And it's so fun if you really get to know this game, if you play it a lot, where you start to find those little combos. It's like playing Terraforming Mars, where you're just so happy when the two right cards come up together and then they work together with your corporation. In this one, everyone has a hidden specific goal. And so when you start to find those right quest cards that go with your specific goal, it's so much fun to put that little puzzle together. So I still love this game. I had taken a break from it for a while. It's hard to get people to get back into it. The D&D theme for the group of people that I've tended to introduce games to, which were generally non-gamers, were not D&D players. The D&D theme, I think, turns them off a bit. So this is not a game that's getting my friends and the people that I've gotten into gaming too excited. And it started to look a little bit outdated. But, I went back and started playing this on an app on a recent flight and just had such a blast going back to it. So I think it's top of my mind a little bit. This is a game that's in my collection and probably won't leave it, even though it doesn't get played a lot. I love Lords of Waterdeep. Still a great game, streamlined, fun. Can introduce anyone to it, and I still have a lot of good times playing it.
Tim, yeah, I had fun playing this one. I think this is one of the first games you introduced to me when we first met. I had a great time playing it. Were you a D&D player growing up? Is that how you got into this, or how did you find it?
No, not a traditional D&D player, although I did play a lot of the old TSI Forgotten Realms computer games on the Commodore 64. So, I was familiar with some of the lore in the world or whatever. Like, I was a nerd. I was a fan of high fantasy and the idea of like building up adventures and quests. But, this doesn't really matter, right? The theme isn't important and probably a bigger turnoff to me than if it had been some other theme. But I think it's an excellent example of worker placement, and that the worker placement is tight. It's hard to get the spots you want. There's a cool build up where you can add new worker placement spots and things like that. So a lot of just fun little quick interesting things that are going on here in a very streamlined game. The theme sucks. I wish it was rethemed. It will never happen. There's plenty of other themes to put worker placement games around, but this game exists and I still like it even for what it is.
I'm just a little surprised that you're old enough to remember Commodore 64.
Yep. Chris, I think I was writing programs on the Commodore 64 when you were still, probably fighting in the Cold War.
with my VIC-20.
Tearing down the Berlin Wall. My number 17 game is another game that involves marriage. Chris, you were talking about obsession and getting married. This is Brian Boru, High King of Ireland. It's a recent game from 2021 by Pierre Sylvester and published by Osprey Games, 2 in a row. This game is pretty neat to me. It has this trick-taking area control type system going on. Is it really trick-taking? I don't know. You don't have to follow suit, and there's no trump suit, so it's somewhere between trick-taking and hand management, and you're assessing when you want to play what color card to get either the top bonus, the super good bonus, or one of the bonuses on the bottom. Not as good, but still okay. And in the process of doing this, you are putting your little circle wooden old school looking chips out on the board into a region of Ireland. And in addition to that, there's these 4 sections around the board that you're all kind of bidding for each round. One is that marriage track. Another one is fend off the Vikings. Another one is the church track, we'll call it. And the final one is something else. I don't remember. Anyway, at the end of each round, you resolve these little things. If you win, you pull your pieces off. If you get second place, you get some little bonus and you keep your pieces on. Third place, And so round around around, there's some carryover, there's some memory. And at the end of the game, you're checking who has most of your little colored tokens in the different regions. And there's some other in-game bonuses that make it super interesting. I really enjoy this game. I've only played it a few times. I think there's a lot of nuance there, a lot of subtlety. It's a mellow game with a mellow color palette that I really dig, and I really like Ireland. So that's why this game is sitting at number 17 for me as Brian Boru, High King of Ireland.
Yeah, it's a fun game. I remember playing that one, and I don't think my memories of it are quite as fond as yours are, but I did find it enjoyable.
Yeah, pretty much the same here. I think it's a game I'd like to go back to a couple times because I did have fun playing it, and I would like to try it again. And I think a couple more plays would kind of dictate whether this is a game that had staying power for me or whether it was kind of forgettable. As is, interesting mechanisms for sure. Just one play, so it did not qualify for my list.
So my number 17 game was a little bit of a rule breaker. And I say that because I generally tried to pull out games that I'd only played once, because with one data point, it's really difficult to say how good a game really is, how much it really fits with me. But this game, like Rap Gods from the last episode, is one that I played once and it stuck with me and I can't get it out of my head and I so badly want to play it again. This is one that we reviewed not too long ago, and it is Golem, designed by Flaminia Persini, Virginio Gili, and Simone Luciani, published by Cranio Creations. This game has such amazing atmosphere to it, which, as you guys all know, is one of my favorite things in a game. This is set in, 16th century Prague, and you are a rabbi. Each player is a rabbi trying to get work done by the use of golems, which are these mythical clay creatures brought to life essentially through magic. There's also students who are trying to control these creatures on behalf of their rabbis. And so there's this interesting push-pull throughout the game of trying to get your golems more and more powerful, because then they can do more and more things for you. They can take more and more powerful actions, but at the same time, that makes them more difficult for your students to control. And then they can get out of control, and then everything all goes crazy. But even though this has a relatively, well, I wouldn't say relatively dry, it's a very Euro game, but it's such a highly thematic and engaging Euro game that it just dug its way into my brain, and I can't get it out. I've actually toyed with the idea of buying a copy of this. I think I probably need to play a game or two first before really digging in and investing in it, but it's definitely one that I want to get back on the table again, and then we'll see. Maybe it'll go up, maybe it'll go down, but for right now, it is at number 17 on my list.
This is a great pick, Chris, and I'm glad to hear that it's been on your mind, because it's been on my mind as well. I think it has some very, very interesting action selection components to it, along with an interesting theme for a dry Euro, and it's kind of kept it in my brain since we played it. I played it twice, and I had some concerns about the replayability, about how repetitive it was going to start to feel, and I still have those concerns. So I would like to play it again, and I think it's one of those games where if you like the gameplay and you can find somebody to go back to again and again, it could be fun regardless of whether it feels like it's kind of a repetitive cycle, because the choices you're making are still interesting, and it's about optimizing and taking advantage of them. So I think it does some of those things really well, and I would love to play this with you again. If you ever do pick up a copy and we get a chance to get in the same room with it, I'd love to get it on the table.
Yeah, we played it the one time. I played it the one time, and I'm on the fence with it. I don't know how I feel about it. I feel like this one could just vanish off into the ether of resource management games, or maybe not. Maybe it'll stick around and have its cult appeal. That's where I'm at with Golem.
All right, so my number 17 is Rajas of the Ganges. This is a worker placement game that does something kind of interesting by making the primary resource that you're using in this game, dice. And the dice you're going to be collecting by taking worker placement spots, but also when you go to other worker placement spots, you have to spend the dice. And the value of the dice in many cases dictates the power of the actions you're taking. And I found it a great puzzle, but I also just love the look and feel of this game. It's this super busy board with all kinds of stuff going on. There's a little bit of a tile placement puzzle. There's worker placement. There's bonuses everywhere you go. And I have just had a great time playing this game. I've played it several times in person. I've played it online several times. Yeah, I think about it all the time. I'd love to have this game. I don't know who would play it with me, because there's lots of other worker placement games, and it's a decent amount to teach. So it's a fairly straightforward game, but I think it's a little hard to teach easily. So this is a game I'm happy to play. I know some people who have it. I'm happy to play their copies when I get the chance to. But I really like Rajas of the Ganges, one of my favorite worker placement games.
This is one, Tim, I felt like it didn't stand out enough. The board itself was pretty gaudy, and there was a lot going on. It was busy. I know once you kind of decipher it and parse it all out, it's just the same as any other board. There's this area to do this thing and this area to do this other thing. But after the rules teach, after all that was going on, it didn't stand out to me. It didn't have that standout appeal. This game kind of reminds me of Praha Kaput Regni with all the stuff going on and this condensed kind of busy board and the different, I don't know. That's my thoughts there with Rajas of the Ganges.
Adam, you're wrong about all that stuff. But no, I'm kidding. I mean, that's cool. I think the board does feel gaudy, right? It's super busy. There's a lot going on, but it also is, to me, it's so pretty. It's like, it's got so much great color and variety in what you can see on the board. I didn't forget to mention that this was designed by Inca Brand and Marcus Brand, and a great game for me.
My number 16 game of all time is one that we've been playing a lot lately. We're all familiar with it. I expect it's going to be higher on your lists. This is Blood Rage by Eric Lang, published by Cool Mini or Not. This game has made its way on to Board Game Arena, where we have had some epic battles back and forth over the past couple months. It's revealing itself more and more with these little nuances, these little strategy, these little avenues you can take to amplify your point production. Tim likes to get these boats and have them just get chopped off, get murdered away to gain all kinds of massive points. I started picking up on something like that. I could have my boat die, and then I could bring it back to life, have it die again, bring it back to life, have it die again. So just some fun ways to create a bunch of points, a lot of nuances there. There's this draft at the beginning of every round where you're trying to combo up these cards. You see what cards are going to go into the next player's hand, and what if I'm giving Chris all these great cards that he's going to like to, well, I better keep this one so he can't just stack these all together and whoop everybody. Well, now I better keep this one so that Tim doesn't get this second boat and have those boats all die and make 900 points in one round. This game has been fantastic. Blood Rage.
Can't argue with Blood Rage.
I think it's solid. I don't think you'll hear anything. I don't think you'll hear anything else about it this week.
I'm going to ignore that and move on to my number 16, which is Through the Ages, a new story of civilization, designed by Vlada Chvátil and published by Czech Games Edition. This is a game that I was introduced to by Adam. He mentioned it last week in his list. It was in his the bottom third. And Tim mentioned how much he doesn't particularly like this game, isn't very interested in it. Because this is such a well-known game, and because Adam already talked about it, I won't get into any detail about it other than to say it's an epic civilization-building game that takes you through antiquity all the way up to the current day. But what I do want to talk about is the weight of this game and how different I think the experience is depending on how you're playing it. So I looked on BGG, and this is a weight 4.42, so nearly as heavy as you can get on the BGG complexity rating, which really, really far up there. And that was one of Tim's complaints. It was really, really difficult to understand what you were doing and to sort of track the various rules of this. And I absolutely get that. When we first played it, Adam and I, we played it on Board Game Arena. In Board Game Arena, everything's easy on Board Game Arena, right? Well, not Through the Ages. It was even tough there. Where I finally broke through and got to love this game was by playing it on the app. It has such an elegant app with a great graphic interface, great sound, great images, and it's so easy to play because all of that administration is being done for you. And not only that, but there is a system where you can very quickly go back and forth. You can undo moves and redo moves and undo one move and then redo it, or go back 5 moves and undo it. So you can constantly be experimenting to see how to optimize what it is that you want to do, which you can't do on Board Game Arena because you have to go through the whole turn and then you hit an undo, and that's a big pain in the butt. Now, what I haven't done is play this game in hard copy, and when I think about the concept of doing that, it seems nearly unimaginable, actually sitting through all of the administration that you'd have to do because there is so much of it and so many things to track. I have a feeling this game would not fare nearly as well with me if I was only playing in hard copy, and I think that it really does benefit from this great app. I'm not sure I'd love it so much if it didn't have that app.
Inevitably, when I raise the concern that a game is too hard to get into or I have a hard time understanding it, somebody will come on social media and tell me that I'm an idiot because their 12-year-old could play the game. So thanks for bringing that up, Chris. I can't wait to get that rubbed in my face later this week. No, this is an interesting game. We talked about it last week. I probably should go back, do the tutorial on the app and learn to play it again and jump into some games with you guys and play it with an actual understanding of the game. Because you guys talking about it and you're both on your top 30, I got to get back into it. I trust you.
Tim, I'm on Twitter right now. My 7-year-old daughter can play this game. You are a dum-dum.
Excellent. My number 16 game of all time is Near and Far. This is published by Red Raven Games and designed by Ryan Lockett, who self-publishes all his games under the Red Raven title. Near and Far is one of the many games that Red Raven publishes, which is a combination of medium to heavyweight Euro game with lots of fun story moments in it, story beats, where you'll go to a spot to get a resource and then you flip through a book and have to read a little story segment and make a choice. And it adds so much flavor to a Euro game. And beyond that, it's just a solid engine building Euro game. I really love it. You can play kind of arcade mode where you just, play any map and, just play a standalone scenario. And it's a fun game like that. But I had one of my favorite gaming experiences playing through this over a weekend with my brother Steve, who's a regular contributor on our show. But him and I played the 12-game scenario through this. The campaign doesn't do a whole lot as far as building up over the course, but there are a few things that happen. Like you will get some experience points. It will let you unlock some special abilities over the course of the game, but it doesn't change too much. It does let you kind of map by map go through this book, and the story progresses a little bit. Some of the moments that you'll reach into the storybook will be characters that you interacted with in the past or will have an impact based on who you interacted with in the past. And it had a clever little system that didn't come up very much but was very exciting when it did, where every once in a while you get to a story beat in one episode and it would say, if you made this choice, then mark this term. It might be the term red in your book. And then later there'd be a storybook like 3 episodes later where you get to this thing and it said, if you marked red in your player sheet, then this effect happens instead of this other thing. So there was kind of this, ongoing effects of the choices you made earlier didn't just impact your current game, but could potentially impact future games. I think the promise didn't quite hit where that could have in that game. And I think Sleeping Gods is supposed to kind of expand on that and do that ongoing growing story in a better way. But Near and Far for me is just an excellent, fun Euro game, drives the kind of classic RPG methodology of you go to the city, you build up your characters, you recruit some new heroes, and then you go out adventuring. And you continue to do that over the course of the game. And I always have a great time with this. This is another game that I think is slightly higher. Probably wouldn't have made my list without the Amber Mines expansion. The Amber Mines expansion fixes the one thing I didn't like about the base game, which was the mine action, which just felt very unthematic. Amber Mines completely changes that and also adds some other things like magic spells and some new variety and the artifacts you can pick up. This is a super fun game. It's my favorite to date Ryan Lockett game. We'll see if the Sleeping Gods Distant Skies knocks that down for me in the future. But I love this game. It's so much fun.
Never tried this. Would love to try it. Love the art in Ryan Lockett games. Got to get this one to the table. Have you tried it, Chris?
Yeah, I played it once with Tim, and I think I had a lot of fun with it. We only played it that one time, and I don't remember what stopped us from playing it another time, but I did enjoy it.
Chris beat me bad at it. I'd been pretty experienced with it, and he figured it out right away. So I probably stopped playing with Chris because I knew he had a leg up.
Just like Through the Ages.
Well, just like another game that Chris whooped us at the first time he played, Brass Birmingham is my number 15 game. This is a game by Martin Wallace, published by Roxley Games. Beautiful production here, I think. There are a lot of chips. You might have to spend a while setting these things up, unless you have a little organizer that kind of pre-organizes all the chips for you. Then setup's still very long, but not as long as it could be. And then I have to mention the iron clays that come with some versions of the game. Poker chips. There's really nice poker chips that come with the game as well. Here you're in Chris's favorite time period, industrializing England, and I think the map is gorgeous. You're in Birmingham and surrounding cities and villages. There are a couple of industry spaces in each of these cities. They're connected to the other cities and towns and villages by these little canals or railways or both. In the first area, you're just playing these canals to connect them. You're flipping over, you're building these industry tiles and you're flipping them over to gain some production, some income for the next after every turn, and you gain some points by flipping these things over. It's so satisfying. You get the resources you need, you connect up to somebody who wants to buy them, and then you're able to finally sell them for probably a couple beers and a card. You discard a card and it lets you sell some stuff. So satisfying to knock these things down. You set them all up in kind of this domino effect. You build up to these turns where you can sell, and you do it. So the description here that I'm talking about probably sounds a little obscure if you haven't seen this game or know what I'm talking about already. There is a little bit of rules trundle to get through, but once you fight your way through that, the game has a pretty neat economy, some pretty neat mechanics, a lot of hand management going on, and a lot of planning, both near term and far term. My number 15 game, Brass Birmingham.
Yeah, I remember playing that first game, the one where I won. And I don't know, maybe it was because I won, but I had a pretty good feeling about it. And then I played the second game of that, and I hated it. So I have no idea where I sit with this game.
What a classically quirky and interesting game by Martin Wallace. And it kind of fits with every game I played by Martin Wallace, where there's just some weird quirkiness to it, but super strong. I always have fun with his games. One of my top games I want to play right now is Anno 1800 by him. And I don't know if we'll ever get it played. Another dry theme. Kind of sounds like a bizarre resource management game, but I don't know. I have good feelings about Martin Wallace's stuff. Always have an interesting time with him.
All right, well, my number 15 game is another relatively recent review that we did, and it's La Granja, designed by Michael Keller and Andreas Odendahl, and published by Spielworks Games. I'm a little surprised that I enjoyed La Granja as much as I did. Honestly, I was shocked. Well, for one, it's got about the ugliest art you could possibly get in a board game. It looks like it's from the 1970s. It looks like it's been sitting around since the 1970s. You are going through the process of building up your farm and selling things at market. And I can't imagine a theme that could possibly be more dry than that. So between bad art and dry theme, what am I even doing with this game? The answer is that the mechanics of it are so fun that it overcomes all that other nonsense. You have the phase where you're building up your farm and you take actions, you roll the dice, and for each dice, you put them into spots where they're assigned to different actions. And so to some degree, your actions that you're able to take during that round are dependent on what dice get rolled. So there's a little bit of excitement there. And then you have to draft those dice before other people take the actions that you want. And then you're trying to make the resources, you can get those resources to market so you can sell them. And there's a little bit of an area control aspect to it as you try to boot other people's market stalls out by putting your market stalls in there. And there's a lot of cool stuff happening. I wish it looked better. And there is the master limited edition that's coming out. It was on Kickstarter. I believe Tim backed that one. I'd love to see that because this game deserves a better production. It's got great gameplay. It just needs to look a lot prettier than it currently does.
Yeah, La Granja, what a great game. I really like this. I'm so glad it's getting a new production that it deserves, and it will be a much better experience because of it. But it didn't even need that. This is a game like Castle of Burgundy, funny enough, has the same artist as La Granja. Both amazing mechanically games, terrible productions. The new production is going to be great. I wish they would have rethemed it as well. This would have been a great game with a more interesting theme to it. But it's kind of clever too. The idea that you're running this little farm and selling goods at market, it's cute. And I think the new production is going to make it great.
This game's so fun. Looking forward to playing this one when it gets to your house, Tim. Let's do it.
All right, my number 15 is Viscounts of the West Kingdom by Garphill Games and Shem Phillips and Sam J. McDonald. This is Viscounts of the West Kingdom. It's not Paladins of the West Kingdom. It's not Architects of the Kingdom. This is Viscounts of the West Kingdom, Adam, in case you're keeping track. And this is not one that you've played, but this is a very clever take on deck building and used in a way that feels like a Euro with the deck building element to it. I really enjoy this. It's got some cool spatial puzzle elements to it, a few different mini games that you're kind of competing for to do the best at, some nice engine building. But the deck building is the superstar here, and this is my favorite of Garphill games that I've played so far, more than once, that is, because the South Tigris series, I've had a chance to play the one game in the South Tigris one time. So Wayfarers of the South Tigris is a game that I think I like just a tad more, but I've only played it once, so it's not on this list. So this is my highest from Garphill Games, and I really love this game. One other thing I want to mention about it is that this is right now continues to be my favorite solo game, and it's pretty clever because there are essentially 4 different automas that you play on this. Each of the 4 player boards, you flip it over and they all have different goals, different kind of focuses that the automa go after. So you're kind of playing a different game every time you play this against the AI. Super fun. I love going back to it. This is my number 15 game, Viscounts of the West Kingdom. Also taught me how to say Viscounts, which I would have pronounced Viscounts if I'd ever read it until I heard board game reviewers talking about it.
No, that's totally how I said it too. I was clueless as to how to say this word or what a Viscount even was. I'd love to play this game and complete my trilogy of confusion of games that are from the West Kingdom. In the meantime, my number 14 game, Chris already mentioned it. I think it's going to surprise Tim that it's this low, maybe. This is Gaia Project.
Whoa, it does surprise me.
Okay. We talked about everything there was about it. I thoroughly enjoy this one. I just think there's 13 other games that at the time I was taking that Pub Meeple thing that I was like, yeah, I'd rather play this one. So that can be temperamental depending on the mood I was in, my temperamental mood when I was rating it. But I love this game. I played it anytime, especially on Board Game Arena, especially if it was ever in person. I love to play it in person again. I'm having more and more fun with this one. Kind of one of those ones that keeps re-blossoming. You keep seeing new things you can do. I'm trying this new faction now. It's this pale teddy bear looking guy who can do these weird things with the purple power system, the power discs that slide around in these 3 different bins, 4 bins even. There's even a little Gaia Project bin. So the way you can manage those and discard them and get them back and put them back, this guy specializes in doing weird things with that. It's just one tiny little area of the game, and it makes such a big difference with this little faction ability. That's the kind of thing you can find over and over again in Gaia Project.
Pale space teddy bear guy. What more can I say?
Gaia Project, what great art. But also, Adam, I am surprised that this isn't higher for you now, because almost every time we play it, Adam says, I love this game so much. And he doesn't say that about a lot of games. So I'm kind of interested to hear the rest of his list. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to identify many games that he doesn't love as much as Gaia Project, but he just has some like warm fuzzies about for some reason. We'll see where it goes from here. Anyway, glad to see it is on your list, Adam. This was a passionate game for me, a game that I've been passionate about for a long time. Not a passionate game for me, but it's a game that I've loved for a long time, and glad to see you guys getting some love for it on your top 20.
It's love, it's just not a passionate love. So, moving on, I'm going to get to my number 14 game, which is Lost Ruins of Arnak, designed by Min and Elwin and published by Czech Games Edition. This is another fun one that I got introduced to by Tim and have grown to love over time. This is a highly, highly, highly thematic Euro game, just like a couple of the others that I've mentioned throughout the list. And in this one, you are explorers trying to seek out adventure and relics and creatures that you can attack as you work your way up a research track to a temple, and you get tablets and jewels and various other things, attack monsters, score points, all kinds of stuff you're doing there. You're doing it in this very Indiana Jones world. And for a Euro game, I mean, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool theme. And it's carried through pretty well. I also like about this game that it moves along pretty quickly. I mean, you can get through a game of this in maybe an hour, which for us is really saying something. And to have that kind of fun packed into a pretty short hour-long game is really great. Doesn't hurt that it's also on BGA, so it makes it really easy to play through on there. But I'm loving this game. I had a chance to play the hard copy at PDXCon when Tim brought it, and that included I think it was Expedition Leaders expansion, which added a really nice little bit of asymmetry to the factions, which I thought gave this a tremendous amount more replayability. And I'd be looking forward to trying that a little bit more as I progress with this game, but only played it once so far. That is night number 14, Lost Ruins of Arnak.
Yeah, Lost Ruins is fun, and I do think that it was a game that started to get a little stale for me, but the expansion shows that there's a lot of space to explore that really blows it up. So loving Lost Ruins.
This is one that we are trying out again on Board Game Arena. I think it's my second or third play, and that's very evident with my score last time. Having fun with it, trying to rediscover it, figure out how the cards work, figure out how the rules work, and how I can use those to my advantage to score points, which is like most board games.
All right, my number 14 is Scythe, designed by Jamie Stegmaier and published by Stonemaier Games. Scythe continues to be probably my absolute favorite production in a board game. This game was published, I think, back in 2014. I don't think a game has succeeded quite as well as Scythe in telling a story, especially in a Euro-style board game, with amazing artwork, cool concepts, and just everything comes together as a production. I love the gameplay of this too, but it doesn't get played a whole lot, which is probably why it's sinking down a little bit for me. It does help that my last play of it was probably one of my favorite gameplay of experience of all time when we played it back in TimCon in last October. I just remember, for some reason, a lot of laughter in that game, a lot of great big moments, and just a great time. This is another game where I think, for me, I don't want to play it without a couple specific expansions at this point. Like, the base game is fun and interesting, but I think it gets a little stagnant after a lot of plays as far as the starting positions and the abilities of the starting 5 factions you can use. Where I think this game really shines is when you really build up the variety. The modular board is my favorite of the expansions that come with it. Completely mixes up the starting positions, changes how powerful each of the factions are, and it's just a fun way to start the game with completely asymmetric spots and roles, and things all get mixed up there. But it's also great that there's a whole bunch of other factions you can pick up and explore with over time. So I love Scythe. This is the game I've probably spent the most money out in upgrading. And one of the cool things about it is most of the upgrades I bought for it, these are official upgrades by Stonemaier Games, like, realistic resources, promo cards, metal mechs that you can replace the plastic mechs with. So I think every upgrade I've bought for this game is available. You can go and buy it from Stonemaier Games and do whatever you want to do with this game. But I even took it to the next level of having my minis painted, my character minis, just so that it was just the most perfect production I could get. So I love this game. I wish I was playing it more. I'd like to get it out soon. It could rise again for me if I found somebody to play it with regularly, but still a great game.
Tim, that last play that we did have in Palm Springs, it was amazing. We had all the different components there. We had the metal mechs. We had all the variety, which I think is key in this game. It can get a little stagnant if you're using those same factions, same starting points. Allows for kind of canned moves, standard openings, which I guess was happening a lot. But having all this variability, such wacky plays. There were some situations, Tim, where you were sure you're going to win a battle against me, and I happened to have another 5 combat card just sitting there. What a fun play that was last time. And Chris, I know you had a great time in that last play too.
I still cannot believe I didn't win that game. I was so confident when we started tallying the score that I won that game. It wasn't even a question in my mind. So anyway, that's enough about that.
Okay, my number 13 game of all time is a little card game that we also played at TimCon. This is Shamans. It's another variation on trick taking. I wasn't sure how it was going to land with the group. I know Chris wasn't too fond of trick taking. We were both all 4 of us kind of hesitant on this. Oh, there's going to be a hidden bad guy, quote unquote, here, and 3 good guys trying to work against this bad guy and try to figure him out and try to kill. What a great time this was. There was all kinds of accusations and finger pointing. It's just, you're trying to get a hold of one of these daggers so you can kill the guy. You're trying to gain a couple points along the way. After either this little token makes it to the moon or it doesn't, people get points. You play again until you reach the point threshold for the game to end, so it can change. Now, 3 of us are on the same team, but Tim has the most points, so you don't want him to win, so maybe you want to kill Tim, and it gets all kinds of crazy situations happening. What a fun game. Shamans is my number 13 game of all time.
This game still shocks me. I don't like trick-taking. I don't like social deduction, but you put them together in Shamans, and all of a sudden you got a game that I really enjoy. So I think that's a real impressive accomplishment by the designers here.
Very fun game, and what a striking production it's got. It's just beautiful to look at. I can't wait to play it again. Got to play it sometime.
The designer here is Cedric Chabousset, and the publisher is Studio H.
So my number 13 game is Clank in Space, a deck-building adventure designed by Paul Denon and published by Direwolf Games. This is one that we did a review episode on. We talked about it some more on the recent PDXCon episode, and I feel like this game has probably come up a half dozen times in other episodes as well. It's a game that I think we all really enjoy. I love this game. One of the first games that I played back when I first started playing games with Tim, and I still love it. It's still a great game. The idea of this game is you're trying to make your way through the ship of a evil overlord to snatch up a valuable relic and make it back off of the ship without getting killed. And there's also a bag building aspect to this game where your clank, when you make noise, you make too much noise and it makes you too easy to hear. It's almost like Nemesis. You draw these little cubes out of the bag, and if your color gets pulled, then you take a hit. And that adds a lot of tension to the game. There is a sort of a time limit built into this one, and it ends up getting really exciting all the way up to the very end of the game. And between all of that excitement and the tremendous sense of humor that this game has, it's another one that just makes me laugh constantly. It's just an absolute winner. It may even be moving up on my list over time because it seems to never get old with me.
Yeah, I agree 100% with Chris's opinion on Clank. It is a blast. Clank in space is fantastic. You might hear more about it from me later in my list.
Interesting. This is a game I played the one time I got punched in the face because I didn't have any boots, couldn't move around the board. I'd love to go back to it, try this one again. It was humorous and fun. I like the little deck building aspect. I need to try this one again.
All right, my number 13 best board game of all time is Lost Ruins of Arnak by Min and Elwyn, published by CGE. Chris mentioned it just a couple numbers back. Yeah, I love this game. It's so nice to have a colorful, thematic resource management game. And again, it's something I think we're going to see more and more where we're getting just fun Euros with a cool theme on them. Now, the game, it was fun to explore for the first 15, 20 games, and then did start to feel repetitive. Like the race up the track, flipping over the monsters, it started to get a little bit repetitive. And I still like playing it that way. But I think if the expansion hadn't been added in here, the Expedition Leaders expansion, it probably wouldn't be on my list or be lower. But the Expedition Leaders expansion just completely changes the game in a couple ways. Asymmetric powers, asymmetric starting decks with the players, which honestly makes the game feel much heavier. In some ways that I don't even like, but that it does change it up enough and change the puzzle where it doesn't feel repetitive at all. But what I like the most is the change to the tracks that happen. There's this new track board that overlays on the temple tracks, has two different sides to it, and completely switches up how that track works, what happens as you move up it, what's the value of moving up it. Really feels like it changes the game a lot. So now that I've got this expansion, I've played it half a dozen times, I still have tons to explore with it, tons to learn about it. I don't think I've won a single game since I got the expansion because I haven't figured it out yet, but I do have a lot of fun playing it. That said, having played that and it being heavier, now I actually enjoy going back to the base game even more as a variety, like for something, if I want a little bit lighter, simpler game, it's fun to go back to it. It's still a great solo game. I can set it up in 5 minutes and play a fun resource management game in 30 minutes, and it's competitive, and it's always fun to try to grab the best cards for your deck, the best relics, the best artifacts. I have a lot of fun with this game. Yeah, I think I'm going to keep going back to it for a long time.
Hey, Tim, I think you are 100% correct about playing it with the expansion, without the expansion, like two entirely separate games. I thought it was also interesting that you mentioned that you don't even necessarily always like it better with the expansion. I felt that way a little bit too. I didn't dislike it, but there were things about it that made it feel so different. I think it was more like I didn't quite feel like I was playing the same game. I think in the end, I would end up appreciating that because it does add so much variety to the game and it would keep it fresh. But it was an interesting dynamic.
My number 12 game of all time is Baseball Highlights 2045. This is a game I've talked about a few times. For me, I love playing this game with my dad. It's a deck builder. I think one of the most thematically appropriate applications of deck building. You kind of got your starting lineup of players that you're using, your 6 guys you're using against, okay, when I say thematically appropriate, it's a bit of a stretch, but bear with me. You have your baseball players that represent what they're doing throughout the course of a 9-inning game. You're playing them one at a time. The other guy gets a chance to counter on his board. You've got these runners that are going around the bases, and you've got these pitchers that are trying to cancel out the other guy's hits. This game is so fun for my dad, and we grew up. We both played baseball. We talked baseball. We used to watch baseball all the time. Every time we get together, we get this game out, and we have fun, reliving old memories, making new ones. I absolutely love this game. Baseball Highlights 2045.
This retro futurist robots playing in classic baseball uniforms art is so cool. This is a fun looking game.
I only played this game a couple times with Adam, and baseball isn't a theme that really hits for me, but it was a pretty clever game. One of the things I kind of remember about it is that the way that an inning played out was pretty remarkable, how they managed to do this by just playing like 2 cards on the table or whatever. But it did feel a little bit random. You're just flipping a card and we'll see how it responds to the other player's card. That's okay. What I really liked about it, though, is the concept that you could play through that first game and recruit some new characters into your deck and retire other characters. And then you could play the next game in the series. And I would like to see another deck builder with a different theme kind of have that campaign style where you're kind of building against it. Because these little deck builders, think of something like Star Realms or Hero Realms, where it just takes you 5 or 10 minutes to play the game. But it'd be fun to, take a little bit of what you built up in that last game and then play through the next one and add to it. So I'd love to see something like that happen. There probably are even some out there, but I really liked how Baseball Highlights handled this.
Right, so a couple more nuances with the theme there, Tim, that you brought up. Each player you have has a money value, right? How much are the fans liking this guy? How many jerseys is he going to sell? How many fans are coming into the stadium buying hot dogs as this guy's playing it? So as you play these guys out there, you're keeping track of how much money value you have. At the end of the little miniature game that you have, you add up all the money from the players you played. You use that to draft a pool of players into your lineup for the next game. You get to use those guys right away. I can see that Tim bought this batter that's just going to hit 3 home runs. Oh, there's a pitcher up there that's going to cancel all this guy's hits. So I know next game when he plays his batter, I can use this pitcher. Oh, guess what? This pitcher is worth $3. So I'm going to be able to buy a super good card after the end of next game. And so maybe you're playing a little 3-game mini-series. Maybe you're going huge. Maybe you're playing a 7-game World Series. So you're going to build up your deck, build up your team throughout the course of these 7 games. So that is just a neat aspect that's not there, and I like it. Another little nuance to the strategy is you get to put one of your players in the on-deck circle. You can either use that guy if you have a pinch hitter. That's right, there's pinch hitters. You can throw your pinch hitter eligible guy out to the discard pile. There's a thematic name for that, I can't remember what it is. And you can bring in this pinch hitter guy. Maybe that's the perfect spot for this guy to come into the game and blast a home run or strike this guy out. You can save that guy for the end of the game. Maybe Tim has 3 hits lined up and your guy in your on-deck circle, or this sort of does a thematics breakdown a little bit, should be a bullpen in this case. You can bring that guy out and you can get the visitor's save. You can bring in a guy from your bullpen and get the save, cancel all the hits, and you maintain that lead. And it's so epic and kind of like, boom, I canceled all your hits, now I win. And so there's some really fun moments from just a simple deck builder. If you like baseball, if you like this kind of old-timey theme, this game is cool. Check it out.
And with that, we are rounding second and headed toward third. And that brings me to my number 12 game of all time, which is another one that was a really big surprise to me. Not so much that it made the list, but because I like this game in the first place. And that is A Feast for Odin, designed by Uwe Rosenberg and published by Spiel. This is another one that Tim talked about a long time ago, and I threw up in my own mouth a little bit because it just sounded so horrible, so dry. But there's some magic in this one that reeled me in. It's happened with a bunch of games recently in the past year or so, and this is one of them. There's something about that combination of that gigantic 4 by 30 grid of worker placement spaces, all with entirely different types of actions that you can take, combined with this weird little polyomino crowns and fishes and all kinds of stuff, action where you're trying to get yourself resources and cover over negative space places on your player mat. I can't explain why I like this game so much, but there's some little itch in my brain that it scratches, and I've really come to appreciate it over time. The Norwegians expansion, I understand, is really good. I haven't played it yet, but that is one that I'd like to try. So far, I've just played the base game and still loving it. So we'll see if that gets old, but for now, it is still near the top of my list, at least for tonight.
It is shocking that this is on your list, Chris. I've learned how much you like it recently, and so I was just thinking about this game yesterday and thinking I bet this is going to show up on Chris's list. So glad to see it here. It didn't make my list. I'm not sure why exactly, because I do like a lot about this game. I like going back to it. Somehow, even though it doesn't make sense, it does play out differently every game. It always feels like an interesting puzzle, even though the same spots are always available to you. But I've had a lot of fun playing this. And in fact, Adam, you probably didn't appreciate it as much because it was an earlier game for you. But we recently played 3-player, and I think I've mostly played it 2 players in the past. And 3 players was fun because it did block out some of the spaces more. It made it a little bit more challenge to get to the stuff you wanted to. So, yeah, I'm still digging this game as well, Chris. Probably belongs a little bit higher on my list, but glad to see it on yours.
Yeah, this game for me rounded third and got thrown out at the plate. I'm not quite there yet with this game blossoming for me. I'll give it a few more shots and see how it goes.
No feast for you?
All right, my number 12 game was much higher on my list last year, and this is Terraforming Mars. Designer is Jacob Frixelius, and the publisher is Stronghold Games. And I think probably the reason it fell a little bit because I still love this game. It's just it hasn't gotten a lot of play lately. I think it's feeling a little stale in the hobby. And there are some games that are a little bit sexier right now that give you some of the same feels. Games like Arc Nova, for example. So I still love to play this game. I was just on a flight back from Mexico a couple weeks ago and busted out the old app on it and was having a lot of fun playing with it. I think if I was playing with somebody regularly, this would probably be higher on my list, though, because it's still a great game. It's fun to figure out that puzzle every game, figure out the best things to do with the cards you're drafting and the corporation you get. And the big box expansion that has all the great, beautiful minis and dual layer player boards fix a lot of the old production, the dull production issues that used to exist there. So I think the game's feeling a little stale. It's dropping a little bit. I could see it rising back up again for me if I could get it played a little bit more, but still a great game. My number 12.
I think one thing that keeps Terraforming Mars above Arc Nova for me, Tim, is just those 10 cards right off the bat. You get that ability to plan ahead already with, these 10 cards that may or may not link together. I like having that first step in which direction do I want to go, and I like having my corporation as well, so I know how that's all going to tie in, and it gives me a good direction of where to go. Also, those 4 cards between each round that you're going to draft, I think all those things come together, and that's some nuance of the game that I think Arc Nova is missing a little bit for me that keep Terraforming Mars a little bit elevated, in my opinion, over Arc Nova. My number 11 game of all time is Ankh, Gods of Egypt. This is another game, the third game in the trilogy by Eric Lang, published by Simon Games, where it's these figurines, these dolls, these little toys on a map, duking it out in this land. You've got some water areas, some desert areas, and some grassy areas, and that's all important because that all comes into play with some of these battle cards that have these crazy effects. Oh my gosh, the way this whole system is designed, the action system, how these little things march over here and trigger events, and you have to start at the top and move down to the bottom for the actions you can take. There's a few innovative things I think going on here. This was my game of 2021. I think it still is one of my top games of 2021. I want to play this one again and again and again and discover all these little corner combinations that I know are there. That's not because of rules complexities, because of the design of the game. These things are going to emerge, and you're going to have all these neat situations that arise because of how this game is designed. That is Ankh, Gods of Egypt.
I want to try Ankh again. I feel like it lost a little bit for me because of that mechanism where you combine the 2 bottom players, and I just thought that was kind of dumb. I didn't like it very much, and the rest of the game was very good. So it deserves another try. I think I would actually really enjoy it more than I did in the first play after I get to know it a little bit better, and maybe I even appreciate that mechanism, but it lost me a little bit on that. My goodness, great production. Love that.
I liked Ankh a lot. I really want to go back and play it some more. So would love to do that whenever you guys are ready.
All right. Well, here it is. Last game of the night. My number 11 of all time is Cthulhu Wars. This is a game I have not played in a long time, but I do love it. It is highly, highly, highly asymmetric in a way that can be a little bit frustrating, honestly. It's both a strength and a weakness. For some of the games that we've talked about where they go a little bit too asymmetric, in Cthulhu Wars, you truly have to understand not just the faction that you're playing, but you have to understand the other factions as well, or you're going to get trounced on because they're going to be doing things that you never saw coming. You have some factions that can almost teleport across the board, and you feel like you're all safe tucked away in your corner, and then all of a sudden they're right on top of you. Or characters that come back to life after you kill them. There's all kinds of things happening. So I truly dig this game. It's actually one that I brought with me to PDXCon, and that didn't end up making it to the table. And I was a little bit bummed out that it didn't. We just didn't have the time for it. And there's too many other games we wanted to play. But I really want to play this one again. I think we reviewed it back in mid to late 2020. I think that was probably the last time that I played it. Now, I almost wanted to drop this game down because I have such a deep frustration right now with Peterson Games. Oh, and by the way, I forgot to mention, this game was designed by Sandy and Lincoln Peterson and is published by Peterson Games. But I've got 2 games that I backed on Kickstarter with Peterson Games back, I believe, in, God, it's hard to believe. I think it was 2018, 2019. So we're talking 2 to 3, 4 years possibly. I was trying to find out exactly when it funded when we did Hyperspace. And honestly, I'm so sick of the lame excuses on that one. I just feel like I need to vent about it a little bit. So I almost wanted to drop down Cthulhu Wars just because of my frustration with Peterson Games. But I didn't, because I'm rating games here, not publishers. So Cthulhu Wars remains number 11 on my list.
Cthulhu Wars is a fun game, and it's been a long time since we played, so I would be happy to go back and play this again as well. There's, aside from the heavy asymmetry, which can make it hard to play the game competitively, just because it's hard to keep track of what everyone else can do, and you can just be surprised by some random ability they've got. The other thing I remember, a little bit of a frustration I had with Cthulhu Wars sometimes, was that you could just be out of power, and then someone else could take like 15 actions in a row, and it could just get really dull to be sitting there waiting for someone else to take their turn. And I know other games have that potential, but it never feels quite so slow to get there. You know, Blood Rage has a very similar action selection mechanism, but it usually is within a couple actions of each other. So there's been a couple plays where I just felt like I was sitting there waiting for a long time. Otherwise, though, you know, for area control and stuff, it's fun. It's got a lot of interesting stuff going on. And yeah, I'd be happy to go back to it.
This is one I'm always going to have fond memories of. You guys introduced this one to me. I think at Chris's house, you had it all set up with a nice cocktail, and I was just blown away by the production and all the dice and all these different spell books and this and that. It was just cool. What a great time we had playing that game. It was just fond memories are going to be locked up with Cthulhu Wars. It's going to be synonymous for the rest of my life. So thanks for bringing that to me. And thanks for sparking those memories.
All right, my number 11 this week, and the last game we're going to talk about in this week's list, is Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar. This game is so much fun. I love it. And I'm actually shocked that it's not in my top 10. But this is one of those games that just could have been in my top 10 if Pub Meeple rankings. I had just been in a slightly different mood when I was going through that ranking engine. Because I look at my top 10 and this is comparable to all of those games for how much I love playing it and how much I want to go back and play it some more. So yeah, Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar is great. We'll just say that it's a runner-up for my top 10 because that's what number 11 basically is, right? So Tzolk'in, the Mayan Calendar, number 11.
Yeah, I'm glad we played this one again, introduced to it from Board Game Arena. I was frustrated that first time because I didn't have corn and it was an outlived situation. All my guys started to die. So I figured out I need to get some corn. How am I going to do that? Oh, now I can do all this other cool stuff. Wow, this is neat. These cogs rotate around. My guys get powerful. I don't even have to do anything. This game is really, really fun.
Agreed. Great game. We may be hearing more about it.
All right, well, that will wrap up our list of the top 11 through 20 board games of all time. Next week, we're going to come back with our top number 1 through 10. And then the week after that, as I mentioned at the start of the show, we're going to be doing our listeners' top 10 games and kind of seeing how they fall with us as well. So we're really excited to talk through that. Thank you for joining us through this top 30 games of all times list. We're having a great time making it. Hope you come back next week. Until next week, take care, everybody.
Night all.
Bye-bye.